Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're watching from. Welcome to the latest edition of the Scott Ritter Show. Last week, the guest I was supposed to have on wasn't able to make it because of the fact that he had frontline combat duties. Instead, you got to hear me give a monologue about my take on the situation of the special military operation in the context of Ukraine's counteroffensive, especially the events in Kharkov. At that time, I indicated that I viewed the Ukrainian offensive as a game-changing event, that it fundamentally altered the reality of the special military operation insofar as Russia was no longer facing a Ukrainian army, but was now confronting a NATO army. And I stated quite forcefully that I believe that the current configuration of Russian forces committed to the special military operation were not up to the task of completing the assigned missions, that there would need to be, I believe, between 100 and 200,000 more troops allocated. A week later, and we have the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, addressing the nation together with the Minister of Defense, Marshal Shoigu. And two things came out of this. One, a partial mobilization of Russian reserves, totaling 300,000 troops. These troops will be mobilized, equipped, trained, and dispatched to various tasks related to the special military operation. And two, Russia is going to be, or should I say, there are going to be several referendums taking place in the near future in the Donbas, in the Donetsk Republic, the Lugansk Republic, and Kherson and Zaporozhye, in which the question will be put forward to the citizens of these territories: do you want to be a part of Russia? The anticipated answer is yes, and it's also anticipated that the Russian Parliament, the Duma, will approve this, and this will be approved by the Russian presidency, and Russia will expand. Novaya Russia will become a political reality. To discuss this event, and these, I should say, these events, I have a very special guest today, Yakov Kedmi. For those who aren't familiar with him, Yakov Kedmi was born in Moscow, and then at a young age brazenly stormed the Israeli consulate in Moscow, demanding that Israel and the Soviet Union do more to allow Jews to leave the Soviet Union and return to Israel. A couple years after that, Kedmi himself went to Israel and soon headed up an organization known as Nativ, which oversaw the Aliyah, or return, of Eastern European Jews to Israel. In 2014, Mr. Kedmi returned to Russia, and since then, he's been a man who has been invited on numerous shows to speak eloquently about political events for Russia, how Russia interfaces the world. He is knowledgeable, he's intelligent, he is brave, he's a man of very strong opinions. So I'd like to welcome Mr. Kedmi to the show, and I'm going to start out with this question. Nativ was responsible for bringing Jews to Israel. Now we have a referendum taking place in Ukraine, which in effect is bringing the Russian nation back to Russia. Do you see any parallel between the two, or how would you describe these referendum and what importance they hold in Russian politics today?
Ну, общее может быть в этом
there might be some
явлении, которое
parallels.
было Натив, совершенно уникальное явление в мире.
Nativ is absolutely a unique and
которое
unprecedented move.
создано было в нашем государстве.
It was set up in our
1952
state in
Одно
1952.
из первых,
It is
одна из первых структур, которая была
one of the
создана
first
в
structures
молодом
which was
государстве,
set
которое
up
только
in a young
начало
state,
существовать
which was only in its
в
infancy.
рамках разведывательного сообщества. И туда
In the
были
framework
направлены
of the
лучшие люди,
intelligence
которые до
community,
этого
and the
занимались
best people were
борьбой за
dispatched to that
с
organization before.
англичанами, за независимость.
They were fighting against the
за
Englishmen,
нелегальный
were
вывоз
fighting for
евреев
independence, were fighting
за
for
создание
illegal
государства.
deportation of
Но
Jews and for
общее
setting up
в
of
этих
Jews.
подходе то, что
But there is a committee among
страна
those two
решила
approaches,
взять на себя
meaning that the
ответственность
country decided
за
to commit
будущее
itself to be responsible for the future of its country, meaning that we were fighting for the future of our people. Nativ was bearing responsibility in front of the state for what was going on, what was happening to Jews in Eastern European nations, and we were responsible for everything that happened to them, including security of Jews. And in that case, Russia decided to implement its national responsibility for the Russian people of Ukraine, for the Russian-speaking population of Ukraine, for that part of Ukrainian population which believes it is associated with the Russian people, with the Russian Federation, wants to be part of that. We, at the time, quite successfully, within those years, fulfilled the idea, in the sense that this part of the Jewish people that is living in Europe, in Eastern Europe, could get incorporated with the Jewish people living in Israel, and we succeeded in that. We had to fight against many countries, many regimes of all the countries of Eastern Europe, including the then Soviet Union, when these countries objected to that, or raised obstacles to that. The modern Russia does not make any impediments, does not raise any obstacles to migration of Jews. But at that time, it was part of the public policy to prevent Jewish repatriation to Israel. For these are those reasons. And we fought against that, and we were a success. We were a victor. In that sense, in that case, this is not about making people leave their residence, but these are originally Russian territories, originally Russian lands, and it was decided, and very naturally, in the light of the international law, that these territories has to be brought back to its origins, meaning that the Russian-speaking people of Donbas wants Donbas to get back to Russia. And this is what is being done. The same is quite natural in relation to all the lands which we may call Novorossiya or Novorussia, what was set up after the Russian-Turkish War, end of the 18th century. And these territories were home to the Russian people, to the Russian-speaking people, and these cities were built by Russia. Whole industry there was set up by Russians, and naturally, these people, after a failed attempt to survive in the so-called independent Ukraine, under the banners of nationalistic rule, which in the recent years has become a totally neo-Nazi rule, they decided that the best way for them, for their future, is to live in Russia. And now this is what is being done. In that case, I would like to quote another person, Ramzan Kadyrov, and he was once asked why he supports Chechnya seeking to live within Russia, why he's standing up for Russia. And he said, we, the Chechens, came up with the conclusion that only within the Russian state we will be able to achieve the best manifestation of our national interests as individuals, as Chechens and as Muslims. And therefore, for us, there is no other way out but to live within the state which provides for the best national, individual and cultural development of our people. That, for instance, this question could be raised in terms of Chechens because they're Russian-speaking, and sadly, it is only within the frames of their own national state that the Russian-speaking people can achieve the best development. And I thought that it is only within our national Jewish state that we, the Jews who want our people to be preserved and to develop, can achieve the best security and progress.
Well, thank you very much for that. But I have a question, though. We speak of Novorossiya, but to me, and I think to most historians, they would say, wait a minute. What about Odessa? What about Kharkiv? What about Dnipropetrovsk? Are these not part of Novorossiya? Especially Odessa, where in May of 2014, 84 Russians were burned to death by neo-Nazi crowds. What about Kharkov, home of the Kharkov men's soccer team, which grew into the Azov regiment? Are not the Russians that live in Odessa, that live in Kharkov, and live in other areas that are traditionally affiliated with Novorossiya, do they not too deserve to be part of the Russian state? Do they not deserve the protection of the Russian government? Are they going to be left behind?
Well, first of all, according to the census of the Russian Empire, before the revolution, there were 10 nationalities which were living in Odessa. I will not list all of them. And one nationality was not indicated there. Malo-Russians. So the number of Ukrainians were what used to be called Malo-Russians. In Odessa, they were less than other 10 ethnicities, were nationalities such as Bulgars, French, Greeks, let alone the Jews, Gypsies, and Russians. So it means what Ukrainian Odessa is about. It says actually what it is. Then, how to look at that right? This is up to the Russian state to decide. Russia did not start the war in order to bring Odessa back to Russia. This was not the mission of the special military operation. Russia recognized independence of Ukraine. It maintained certain relations with Ukraine after 2014. Russia tried to find some modus vivendi or the way to coexist with Ukraine despite whatever was taking place, and Ukraine neglected that. And more and more Ukraine turned into a side aimed against Russia, not just as an ideological or propaganda warfare, but it turned into a military base against Russia. When the threat against Russia, against the Russian-speaking people of Donbas materialized, when Ukraine almost proceeded with hostilities, Russia decided to act ahead of that and prevent Ukraine from conquering Donbas. So it means that it is Ukraine which committed a provocation. What happened next? That's a result of the military actions, of hostilities, as a result of these military activities. Part of Malo-Russia was liberated by the Russian troops. The part which is already liberated, people there are prepared to implement the right, to execute the right to live in Russia. As for the other part of that territory is concerned, as far as it is being ruled by Banderovtsi regime, it cannot express its wish, just like it was not allowed to do that back in 2014, so let's wait for the military developments. If actually that threat could be diverted other way, probably it could be done, could have been done. But now a lot depends on how the military developments are going on, and what shape it takes very soon we will see liberation not only of those areas which were liberated, but the whole Russia or Novorossiya and other territories would be liberated, because it is not just the former territories of Novorossiya, not just the Russian-speaking people who are suffering. Ukrainians are suffering from that, because the tragedy of Nazi Germany, of Nazi regime, is that these were the German people who suffered from that as well. And in Ukraine, this regime makes suffer all the people, Ukrainians and the Russian-speaking people.
Thank you very much for that. When we speak of the concept of a referendum that brings Novorossiya back to Russia, this changes the political dynamic, but that political dynamic is attached to a military reality. And that military reality is that Russia, as the president said in his Shoigu, Russia is no longer facing Ukraine. Russia is facing NATO and the accumulated military power of NATO and other European allies. This is why there's a partial mobilization of 300,000 troops. Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, recently said that all objectives set forth in the special military operation will be accomplished. And it doesn't matter how much time. Is this partial mobilization, will this provide sufficient resources to accomplish that task? Is Russia biting off more than it can chew? Is there going to need to be another mobilization and another mobilization? Or has this been thought out in terms of being able to confront NATO, solve the Ukrainian problem, and bring to an end the Russian-Ukrainian conflict?
Well, there are several aspects to that. First, as a result of this referenda, the borders of Russia will extend to the west. And now shelling of Donetsk or of Kherson or any other city which is on the territory of Luhansk, Donetsk region or Kherson region or Zaporozhye, that would equal shelling of the Russian territory, and therefore the direction of Russia will be totally different. It will be no longer the one it used to be. It would be much stronger, much more effective and efficient. Any negotiations that may take place with Ukraine, although they are not on the table any longer, that would be about the borders of Russia. According to the constitution, Russia cannot give up any of its territory. So this is back to Russia once and forever. Second, there was some uncertainty, especially after the Ukrainian counteroffensive near Kharkiv, regarding what is going on those territories, similar to what happened before. Any territory which is going to be liberated will become the territory of Russia. So uncertainty regarding the people or uncertainty regarding the future of the people, this uncertainty will be removed. The first question that the local people ask the Russian soldiers, are you going to leave or not? But now, for sure, we may say that where the Russian soldiers are going to come in the nearest future, they will come to make Russia stay there forever, for ages. That would be the Russian territory. And certainly it would remove the uncertainty that used to be there. In terms of politics and in terms of the potential military reaction to the shelling of the Russian territory. A few words about mobilization. The very objective of the mobilization is to release enough forces to hold hostilities on the territory of Ukraine. Part of the functions which were performed by the contracted officers, hired soldiers. Now that would be the territory of Russia. And these seasoned soldiers would be replaced with the mobilized troops to perform other functions. The soldiers out of those 300,000 people who were drawn into active duty, part of the detachments which were stationed in Russia as a reserve, just in case if a conflict spills over or slides to a conflict against NATO, these reserve troops would be replaced with the mobilized ones, and these reserve troops could be dispatched, could be sent to Ukraine. The front line is about 1,000 kilometers long, so it is necessary to create, and this is what Russia does, to create mobile tank units in order to actually defend that territory. 1,000 kilometers, this is a very vast line where to start an offensive. Setting up those units in the forces which are right now fighting in Ukraine will help to actually make the most capable forces to be engaged in fight. Well, the mobilized reserve will not be used for the hostilities. They would replace other units which are now not in the front line, which are not fighting, but I mean that the mobilized troops would replace the reserve troops which are stationed right now, and so that the most capable troops would be sent to the front line. It would strengthen the military capability of the Russian army along this 1,000 long line from Kherson to Kharkiv, and on the other hand, it will help to more efficiently control the situation in liberated territories in Luhansk and Donetsk, as well as in Kherson and Zaporozhye. I believe that the number which was mobilized also actually embraces the territories which have already been liberated. So it means that the mobilized reserves troops would be used in order to make for their home front, so to say, not to fight. The General Staff determined that in order to complete that military operation, special military operation, they are lacking 300,000 people in order to use them to bring about more troops to the front line, but not using the mobilized soldiers. Not what I mean. We cannot say that the troops which are engaged in the hostilities will not increase by 300,000. Certainly, there will be some build-up, but all in all, actually, there are about 300,000 of the Navy and the Army in Russia. So it means that the mobilized 300,000 troops would be used for auxiliary operations.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that answer. You know, when I spoke last week before President Putin made his announcement, I had said that I didn't believe that general mobilization was a wise decision because of the political consequences and the economic consequences, recognizing that Russia right now is engaged in an economic war with the West. The West sanctioned Russia, seeking to destroy the Russian economy, and Russia has successfully disengaged from the West and pivoted east. But it's a very critical time for the Russian economy, I believe. Now, Russia didn't do a general mobilization. It's a partial mobilization, but there still is an economic aspect. Resources are going to be diverted to defense industries, which will heighten production to support this effort. Is Russia in risk of undoing the economic gains it has made since the special military operation began? Is this a foolhardy move, or is the Russian economy able to absorb the consequences of partial mobilization and yet continue with its pivot to the east and its cooperation with China, India, and other nations?
First of all, 300,000. This is just a tiny bit of what Russia may mobilize. As you know, Russia may mobilize 25 million people. So this is our reserve. The ones who would be called in for active duty are the ones who once served in the army, who are healthy enough, whose age is below a certain threshold, and that their military specialization is needed. For instance, a lot of doctors, medical doctors would be called up. The army does a lot of functions on the territories which is not in the front line, but 300,000 mobilized people. All of them are going to sign a contract, and they would get as much as the contract soldiers are getting, and this is just a tiny bit of the workforce in Russia. The students will not be drafted, and the ones who are serving in the army right now will not be moved to Ukraine. So it is not just like in Ukraine when people would be just caught in the street and sent to the army. This is how they are doing that mobilization in Ukraine. In Russia, the mobilization is very selective. It is limited, and judging by Russia's economic situation, the Russian economy will withstand it. The Russian defense industry had to increase its capability and its efficiency, and mobilization is only a help to that. The military capacity of the defense industry is going up. Look at the munitions which are being spent, so to say, and at every stage the Russian troops need more and more munition. On the one hand, this strengthens the Russian economy, and the Russian economy can cope with that. The spending required is not huge. Russia has enough money, enough funds to do that mobilization, and a mobilization which would be more scaled up, a bigger one, meaning that that mobilization will not bring about a halt of the industries and will not even complicate the production. Just 300,000 people, this is just a tiny share of the Russian workforce.
You mentioned munitions and the need for Russia to produce more munitions to meet the demands of combat. There was a story this week that I think got buried by President Putin's announcement, and that is the emergence on the battlefield of drones that appear to be manufactured by Iran. And these drones are being used in large numbers with great effect. I had argued, apparently wrong, that Russia had no need for Iranian drones, that the Russian defense industry was more than capable of producing its own drones. Is the appearance of these Iranian drones, is this a sign of Russian weakness, or is this a sign of the maturity of the Russian defense industry to work in collaboration with other nations to build munitions that are useful to Russian military forces on the front line?
Well,
drones, as for the drones are concerned, Russia has not confirmed that these are the Iranian-made drones, but let us treat them as Iranian ones. And I do think that when the Russian Defense Ministry planned for the use of drones and how many they needed, they committed certain mistakes, certain errors in terms of the planning. So they did not pay a lot of attention to the number of drones, to the how they are going to deploy it within the units and how it could be incorporated into the tactics. I have only one explanation to that. Russia was not prepared. Well, Israeli army uses drones more than any other army in the world does, more than even the Americans do. Because the number of drones and the diversity in Israel is immense. Israel produces 70 types of drones, including the ones designed for tactical purposes, but we have better conditions, meaning that we can use components from all over the world, something that Russia cannot afford. But the Russian army was prepared for totally a different battle, not such contact ones, especially when it has to break the strongholds which were erected in Donbas. The strongholds totally cemented when one stronghold would cover another one and another one, so such a stacked one. Russia was preparing for the maneuvers, very mobile warfare. And actually, once the troops are not in the trenches, the drones are not used widely. And that's why Russia, when actually it was preparing its troops for a totally different battle. I'm speaking about the land battle. When we speak about the non-conventional war, the drones will not play any significant role. And it turned out that in Ukraine, Russia has to fight a totally different war, not the one which it was supposed to wage. And for that war, totally different drones are needed in terms of quantity and quality, but this is a temporary phenomenon. After Ukraine, for instance, if we imagine that Russia will have to fight against NATO, then totally different drones would be needed, more intelligence drones would be needed, and even attacking ones, striking ones, but its role again would not be so critical. Today we can use drones, especially the striking ones, which are available in Iran and other countries. One suicide striking drone is enough to destroy a tank or multiple launch rocket system, and it can be useful in the today's conflict, but this is not useful for the wars waged between the tanking divisions, when one division has to just oppose to confront another such a tank division. Russia may use anti-drone warfare to reduce the efficiency of such drones. Laser weapons can be used in such systems, are already available in Israel, in Russia, they also have such a weapon, which is not being deployed yet. And electronic warfare can be used to neutralize the drones, the striking ones and the intelligence ones. So this is a temporary shortage of drones, or a temporary phenomenon, when it turned out that this very type of drones is needed. And means that these are the drones which are needed, especially here and there, that time. Russia has lots of costs and has huge military defense budget. Well, the general staff believe that this is enough, but this is a mistake. Sometimes mistakes happen. The army, especially the strategic departments, not always they are right. Not everything you can calculate. The current developments prove that. But for huge help that NATO provides to Ukraine in terms of supplying state-of-the-art warfare, targeting homing systems, etc. But for that, these drones would not be needed. In the last 4 months, the Russian army almost totally demolished and destroyed all the types of weapons which were left in Ukraine after the collapse of the USSR. Today, the main problem for these drones, this is about the new types of warfare, new types of weapons. All these pieces of military equipment are few, some tanks and some MLRS. They are good, but again, the best weapon against the tank, that's another tank.
Thank you very much for that. I have to say that's a very enlightening answer, and I think anybody watching this program will be will gain a lot from that answer, as with all your answers. I'd like to ask you one more question, sir, if I may. You famously, or infamously, depending on your point of view, defended Joseph Stalin as the greatest Russian statesman in history. I'm not asking you to defend that position or talk about that. I want you to project yourself in the future. The future, Mr. Kedmi, talking about Vladimir Putin. Today he's reviled in the West. He's called a dictator, an autocrat. He's accused of many crimes. But using critical analysis, how do you think history, especially Russian history, would judge the performance of Vladimir Putin so far in the special military operation?
Well, regarding Joseph Stalin, I did not defend him. I was defending the historical truth regarding him as a person. I called to unbiasedly and objectively, without any prejudices, using just facts, without adapting these facts for the political situation, to assess him as a historical person. Just like today we look at Napoleon, or we judge any other actor. Napoleon was a very cruel ruler because he executed and used cannons to suppress any attempts of the people to restore a really democratic regime in Paris. And he even became a dictator. Napoleon destroyed 3 generations of the French people, totally. In all his battles and wars, the Napoleonic Wars brought death and demolishing to all European countries. But this is not the only thing that he did. And still, he is buried in the Pantheon in Paris, and all the French treat him with respect to the positive changes and actions that certainly reflected in the fate of the mankind and of France. Just like the French people were courageous and mature enough to objectively judge about their history. The same has to be done regarding Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin, or whoever. Just like it is appropriate. We do not have to adapt for the political situation, which has nothing to do with the historic reality. So I was not defending Stalin. I was defending the historical truth of Russia and its development, and defending its state public actors. Regarding Mr. Putin, there are some objective factors, and he will go down into history. And I know for sure because I used to work in Russia. I professionally worked in Russia starting from 1988, and I was in charge of the Russian affairs starting from 1978.
К началу правления Путина, если бы он не пришел, его бы не привели случайно к власти,
Mr. Putin is not accidentally brought to power, there will be no Russia.
Если продолжалась бы власть, которая была при Ельцине,
the rule which used to be under Boris Yeltsin lasted, then Russia would not survive for more than 3 to 5 years. It will cease to exist as a unified state. The military budget of Russia in the year 2000 was $5 billion. Everyone who understands what the army and the military is, if you look at the map of Russia, you will be horrified. Only by 2010, President Putin brought Russia's economy to the state it used to be in 1990. President Putin said that the damage inflicted to Russia in 1990s is comparable to the damage inflicted to the USSR throughout the years of the World War II. And he managed to raise Russia and to rebuild it as the country with a developed economy, with sustainable economy, and combating the high crime rate which used to be in Moscow. I remember soldiers armed with Kalashnikov assault rifles because of gangsters which were rampant in the streets of Moscow. Some of these gangsters I knew personally. And he freed Russia from the ugly thefts and embezzlement by oligarchs who totally sold out Russia and turned that into nothing. I remember empty eyes of Moscow intelligentsia, Russian intellectuals, people who I knew from my childhood. I knew them, who were selling their books. The books that they collected for years, they had to sell them because they had no food. President Putin brought Russia back not only to the world map, but he let Russia get restored as a state. Not just get restored, but he helped Russia to develop. And now, Russia, with all its deficiencies, I really criticize that. I try to be polite, I try not to meddle in the Russian affairs, but Russia is a very strong state, and it would have ceased to exist. Russia was preserved because of President Putin. Another question is whether Russia could be better. Well, this question has no meaning, because there was no other ruler, there was no other person who could raise that country from ruins. There was no one else but him, and he did that. And history doesn't know whether there might be another person. And actually, the history doesn't know any ifs. Russia Mr. Putin did that with all the advantages and disadvantages, and that's why everyone living in Russia now are glad that the state does exist, and they have to be grateful to him because he did that. And this is how he will go down in history. He will be remembered in history. But the mistakes he committed and what he did right or wrong, again, it would be remembered, but this is not the most important thing. But most importantly, the country does exist, it develops, and it is self-sufficient. And it is one of the most promising countries in the world today.
I want to thank you very much, Yaakov Kedmi. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for answering the questions. This has been the Scott Ritter Show. And I thank people for tuning in, and we'll be here next week to have yet another enlightening interview. Remember, knowledge is power. Have a good day.